like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all time.
All right, Dark Enlightenment. Welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy this show personally. I've probably listened to a dozen episodes or more, probably more by now. And I think it's one of the better long form interviews shows out there. So, thank you for thinking I'm worth talking to for an extended period of time.
Oh yeah, man. I'm really looking forward to it. I think I first became aware of you when you and Pete did an episode of, I believe it was Race War in High School. Is that correct?
Yeah. We did several episodes of Race War in High School, and I think I talked to him a little bit about my particular areas of expertise and hobby horses before that. But that's where I really kind of got onto multiple episodes with Pete. And ever since we've been friends, and it's been a great for me, and I hope for Pete as well to be friends with Pete. So I really enjoyed being on his program.
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was listening to that episode. I was out of school. I was working in a factory, in, shall we say, similar conditions to those described in the school at the center of Race War in High School, and I had this kind of dual realization, which is one, I know this is true because I'm living in it. And two, I really, really hope my headphones don't fall out because it would be a bad way to end that job. I'll put it that way. But anyway, man, we're not here to just talk about, the things you've done in the past, but actually to talk about kind of one of your hobby horses, right? One of the issues you bring up often. So do you want to introduce that and then maybe explain how you became interested in it?
Well, I went to school for an infrastructure related thing many years ago and did a lot of windshield time in certain parts of the United States and saw like how falling apart things were. And at the same time, I was simultaneously getting red pilled on issues. And this is maybe 2010 timeframe, 2008 timeframe. So I'm in my mid 40s. I'm one of those, cynical OG guys that was behind the original alt-right, and I've kind of just been stuck around, and I've basically just been continuously talking for the last 10 years and more about how America's infrastructure is screwed for structural reasons that aren't even like they didn't put enough money in the budget sort of thing, but they're just not capable of doing what they've been asked to do. It's like trying to build a bridge out of spaghetti, at some point, like you can try and you can come up with all these elaborate workarounds, but at some point it's going to rain and it's going to fall apart. And there's not a whole lot of public conversation about any of this, right? Because there's not a whole lot of public conversation about anything that required honesty or sacrifice from our public officials. And so we're just going to keep merrily just driving off the cliff, Thelma and Louise style. And most people are just going to blithely not figure it out until they're over the cliff and halfway into the other side of the canyon.
To me, I had some of a similar realization, right? I drive a lot for work and have done a lot of road trips. And, I'm lucky enough to live in an area of the country where the infrastructure is, not amazing, but decent. And you get to certain urban centers in the South. Like the example I think of is New Orleans. And you realize that is not a universal, right? You go to these places and it looks like, just the condition of the roads, what is considered to be acceptable conditions in public spaces in it. I mean, it truly does look like a third world country. So I'm going to pretty much, let's be honest. I'm going to lob, shall we say a softball, right? Something that I'm expecting you to have an answer to. But if you talk to liberals, right, they will say things like, the real problem with infrastructure in the US is that we don't spend enough. We need more money, more revenue. How true is that? Is that the source of the issue?
Well, yes and no. As with almost everything in America, public life, conservatives and liberals are both lying, but they're lying in different ways for different reasons, and neither one of them is willing to tell the truth because it would fundamentally destroy one of their positions. So, on the one hand, yeah, a lot of it is from underinvestment. That's true. But the problem there isn't so much that they're not spending enough money and like if you just added a bus line, everything would like some, according to liberals, right? There is some golden future where if we spent enough public money, which is effectively went into enough public debt, we would eventually reach the promised land. But of course, the promised land has shifted because they're after something is impossible to achieve is equity, right? And that's just not a possible thing to achieve. But what you're dealing with isn't a lack of spending problem, because we spend billions of dollars often to no good effect, right? We spend all this money, and are we building things or places that pay us back? And the answer is no. So effectively, that old joke about, well, yeah, we make a loss on every sale, but we'll make it up on the volume. And that's just not to use a leftist term, that's not a sustainable way to run anything. So if you keep building things that are money losses, right, that's going to be the problem. And for Republicans, their particular, all we need is, the problem isn't, lack of public housing, or, we spend too much on this, or we spend too much on that. We just need more freedom. Well, freedom to do what? And what does freedom mean? Does freedom mean being in the car for 6 hours a day? Because that's what it means to be in Houston, Texas. That's what freedom means is congratulations. In order to live in a house that's affordable, you have to spend 90 minutes each way commuting to in and out of Houston or Los Angeles or anywhere, right? Any one of America's big cities. You're going to spend an inordinate amount of your life in traffic. Our mutual friend Pete Quinones, when I first started bringing this stuff up to him, he mentioned he had formerly lived in Atlanta, which is one of America's worst cities for this sort of thing. And there was a friend of his that was literally spending 4 hours a day, 5 days a week in his car.
Yeah, which is absurd. I think that you're right to present this as a situation where both liberals and conservatives are lying to you, right? Because the conservative answer is build another lane in the highway, right? Build a Chinese style 40-lane highway, infinite cars going everywhere all at once. And look, like, I like driving, I prefer it to some alternatives, but again, it's not a particularly great way to run a city. And on the other hand, right, you have the liberal answer, which is basically, let me control your entire life and force you into a bus with like 3 meth heads. I mean, they don't say that, right? They'll paint you this rosy picture. But if you've ever been to a particularly liberal American city, and if you've used public transportation, you know exactly what that is. I think it's one of the many frustrating things because, look, like the history of public transportation, in the US is not particularly easy to talk about in traditionally right-wing or left-wing terms, right? So it's like, well, okay, are the railroads free enterprise? I mean, kind of, but not really. Or on the other hand, right, you do have, automakers lobbying the government to get things like, obviously the freeway system, but also to defund things like streetcars, right? My city used to have a streetcar network, and then a prominent automaker paid the mayor a bunch of money, and we don't have one anymore. This was again 100 years ago. But to me, right, the truly frustrating thing about that, right, is that, even in relatively recent times, right, like pre 64, we'll say about then, buses, public transportation in the US was nice, right? It was something that respectable people did. And then once we changed our social standards about what behavior was acceptable, that is no longer the case, right? That is a thing for the underclass now. Sorry, Dark Enlightenment, I've been on a little bit of a rant, but do you see what I'm getting at?
You cannot, if you're a man, right? And there are people literally vacating their bladders on city buses, which I have seen. Granted, it's, edgy Telegram channels, but or poor Daniel Penny, who's, on trial for his life for doing the right thing on a public bus. Right? I can't send, women and kids on a bus where like crazy people who might have knives are randomly attacking folks. Your wife can't go get groceries in that sort of situation. You've got to live far away from that. And effectively what America has done, if you're familiar with the consultant's triangle, right? Of you can have something good, you can have something cheap, you can have something fast, but you got to pick two, right? You can have something good and you can have something cheap, but it's going to take a long time. You can have something fast, you can have something good, it's going to cost a lot of money. You can have something that's cheap and fast, but it's not going to be very good. The Temu.com, right? Like that's the sort of, well, in America, you can have something that's safe, something that's close to your job, or something that you can afford. And you get to pick two. And for 99% of everybody, the choice that they have to make is something that they can afford and something that's safe. You can't have a family in an environment where your children aren't safe if they go outside to play. You just can't. You can't have children running around in a place where they're not safe. And then if something awful happens, how do you, oh, if I had only, been a little more racist, this child would be alive. How many hundreds of times have we seen that in the UK or in the United States where, some poor gal gets, running at 2 a.m, running at 5 o'clock in the morning, and some diversity shows up, and, or it's Memphis or Molly Tibbetts or that poor gal who was on the wharf in San Francisco. I mean, you can come up with a dozen cases easily, at the drop of a hat. And, the right-wing Republican solution is just drive further away till you can afford something because freedom and capitalism. Well, okay, but that's not a life. Like, I suppose as a podcaster, I should be grateful, but sometime around 15, maybe 20 years ago now, after the invention of the iPod, someone realized like they didn't have to listen to commercial radio anymore because they were stuck in traffic in Atlanta or in, the ring of Houston or in, on I-5 in Los Angeles. And, someone was like, welcome to 100.7 The Fox, where we still pretend it's 1978 and you still have here for the third time today is Led Zeppelin with Stairway to Heaven. And they said, if I have to listen to one more freaking Jimmy Page guitar solo, I'm going to kill somebody. And so they invented the podcast, right? That's effectively how podcasting became a thing, is people stuck in their cars who were just sick to death of the same bland stuff over and over and over and over again. that George Bush enabled with his telecommunications acts, and when he was president, what is now iHeartRadio was at the time Clear Channel Communications, and they had what they called their six-pack. They could own 6 radio stations in any community, right? And you had, your menopausal women stations, Magic 96.7, and the Fox 100.7, where we still pretend it's 1978 and you still have hair. And then there was the sports radio station where we, like surrogate activities for men with low testosterone who want to pretend they're high testosterone. And then there was the, Rush Limbaugh political station. And then there was the country music station. And then, typically they'd have maybe like a hip hop station or something. Like that was their 6-pack. The 2 AM stations, the sports and the political talk, and then the 4, FM music stations. And they're all the same. Right? And from coast to coast, from border to border, welcome to 91.7 National Public Radio, where we're going to speak in this soporific voice all day long. And a bunch of foreigners with unpronounceable names are going to pretend that they're morally superior to you Americans because they are talking in this particular tone of voice. And they're going to tell you you're a bad person for thinking that the economy should actually be based on producing real goods. And if you have any kind of thought about privileging your own children over someone else's children, you're a bigot. And also, we care lots about Israel, but not a lot about Nebraska. So we're cosmopolitan and more sophisticated than you because we know more. That's every national public radio station in America, right? Far left end of the dial, far left politically, absolutely soporific, condescending. And rather than just say, this sucks and people shouldn't have to live this way, Republicans say, because they're at a local government level, Republicans are in the pocket of developers and car sales guys. Well, if everyone has to live 90 miles from work or more, and a significant chunk of the local economy is the building trades, building houses for people running away from, the last five more minutes down the highway from the last time we tried this whole diversity landing and expanding, then, car dealerships and builders are going to be like, this is great. This is just an infinite money percent, and banks, of course, don't mind because the city and the state and local governments need bonds to finance, building the roads or new construction or what have you. Or they need bonds to build the roads, and then the builder needs a loan from the bank to purchase the land, and then all the people that he sells the land to piece by piece are going to need loans, and they're going to need loans for cars, and all the guys who are working are going to be working, and they'll take out loans for their cars or their tools or their this or their that. So there's just a, when you look at this iron triangle bureaucracy of, finance and construction trades and, political interests, or, the economic interests, the financial interests, and the political interests, Democrats think it's great because, we're coming up on an election, right? It's impossible to organize Republicans because how do you knock on 1,000 doors in a Republican neighborhood? It would take you all day because they're so far apart. Because everyone is in their own SUV, in their own, suburb that it looks like a fallen tree branch with their endless cul-de-sacs and your winding streets. Whereas organizing Democrats is just as easy as showing up at the local church and be like, hey, everybody, come down to, the corner, 2 blocks, and we'll get you registered to vote. So you can get 1,000 people in 2 hours in a core city, whereas getting 1,000 people in a far flung suburb is almost impossible. It takes vastly more energy and time to find 1,000 people in the suburbs. So there's all these political sides to it as well. It effectively, all it does is disempower white people with families. That's effectively what it does, by costing them time, money, and in an ability to organize.
So you were mentioning earlier, right? You were talking about this kind of like desire to avoid the consequences of the Civil Rights Act, right? Which reminds me of the best ever Greg Hood or James Kirkpatrick tweet, which is basically that, wealth in America is determined by how much you can avoid the consequences of the Civil Rights Act. And, it's let's be honest, it is no shock that, the massive growth of suburbia starts after the kind of early rumblings of the civil rights movement, right, in the 50s, accelerates massively through the 60s. And, not even a full generation later, right, by the end of the 70s and the 80s, what do we have, right? We have these donut cities where everyone has moved out to avoid crime. The center has completely collapsed, and people drive from the suburbs into the city to work and then back. And
Right, well, the growth of the suburbs started is a consequence of a 1948 Supreme Court decision, Shelley v. Kramer, that made restrictive covenants illegal. So if you go to your local county deeds office and you look up a deed for a property that was there in 1910 or whatever, you can find them. In the deed itself, there will be language that says, "This house shall not be sold to any member of the Lloyd or Asian races," or whatever it is. There'll be specific terminology in the deed, or "This house shall only be sold to a member of the Caucasian race." Right. And effectively it was a restriction on the deed itself that, of legally enforced segregation. And Shelley v. Kramer in 1948 made that illegal. Right. And so since you couldn't legally keep people out, people used time, distance, and money to achieve the same thing. And when gas was 10 cents a gallon or 5 cents a gallon in 1952, that was doable. In 2008 or in 2007, after the gas price hike caused by the war in Iraq, all of a sudden, when you're a trades guy and you're driving an F-250 because you have to, and you're driving in from Bakersfield to Los Angeles every day, at $2 a gallon, it's affordable barely. At $4.50 a gallon, it's impossible. And I should say that the great Steve Saylor was a major influence on me, and I learned a lot from him in the early 2000s and 2010s. So, but we're talking about this thing that right. Everyone knows Greg Hood is a national treasure, and he should be far, far widely read than he is. And if there was any justice, he'd be, on Sunday shows, etc. People should check out his podcast, View from the Right, at American Renaissance. But yes, that's effectively what social life in America is about: is making enough money to run away from your own political decisions. Right.
Well, and it sort of creates this death spiral as well, right? You were talking earlier about the inability to fund a city, right? When every decision you make is at a loss, eventually, right, there's no money left. And traditionally, right, the way that governments make bad decisions that work out for them, right, it's like, oh, well, we'll lose money on this project, but it will improve trade. It will grow the relative GDP, and we'll get more taxes off that, right? That's the thought process. But when you are creating this vacuum where everyone who can get out is, right? Anyone who is making money is taking that somewhere else and their tax dollars with them, still using the infrastructure to drive in and out of the city, right? But all of your elected leaders, their constituency is the people who are left. And let's be honest, the fact that they're left indicates that they're probably not, to quote Donald Trump, they're probably not sending their best. I'll put it that way. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Of course. Yeah. And it's a twofold problem, right? On the one hand, there was a great, let me find it here. Gentleman on Twitter, right. The only real net taxpayers, right, are white men, and white men with families in particular are so productive because they have to be, that they'll produce so much that everyone else effectively gets to eat off of that productivity. Right. And when you drive all those productive people out, and the only people who are left are effectively net taxpayers, government employees, or what I call the cat lady industrial complex, right? There's a ton of jobs out there that are ostensibly in the private economy that wouldn't exist without government interference. Right. So that's actually a government job. Right. If your company has a diversity coordinator or a chief diversity officer, that is not a job that, like, someone in the C-suite who is actually responsible for the company's health. No one said that was a job that they what we really need is one of these, right? No, that's government creation. And what, again, it's hard to organize those people who are in the far-flung suburbs. They don't have time, right? They're spending 2, 3, possibly even 4 hours a day in the car. So by the time, they leave before, to get work at 8 o'clock, they're leaving at 5:30 in the morning. They're not getting home till 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night. So when that's your, a 12-hour day, what other time do you have to go to Cub Scout meetings or volunteer for the soup kitchen or attend a community meeting? You don't have any time. You're exhausted. You probably haven't spoken to your spouse all day. You eat dinner, you fall asleep, all to get up and do it again just because you don't have any energy left. Well, that hollowed out center, what's interesting about that is if you actually plot what those properties in the middle of town are worth, what they contribute versus what they get, right? Their net taxpayer, if you do a net, they receive this much government services, or they cost the government this much, and they receive this much, they're actually net earners for the state. But that's not because they're productive places who, are thriving economically or whatever. It's just that there's nothing there. Right? If the trash pickup doesn't come by but once a month, nobody's going to complain. And if the streets are filled with trash, nobody cares because nobody lives there. So, a great way to make someplace revenue positive is just don't do any maintenance. Don't care about it and still tax it. And whatever tax you get, well, you got something out of it. The problem with this, of course, is all of the people who are making these ostensible decisions, right? I don't know who's the present mayor of Los Angeles. Is it Eric Garcetti still?
I am very proud that I have no idea because I never go to LA. I can look it up. Let me see. It is Karen Bass, who looks exactly like what you think she would. But sorry, carry on.
Okay. So, right, literal Karen, right? Let me find this here. Oh, good Lord.
Okay, you looked her up. You see exactly what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So
She looks like a middle school principal.
Yeah. Preceded by Eric Garcetti, and she was the 26th chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, right?
Yes, that is true.
So, right, this woman has never paid taxes in her life. She's always lived at the public fisc. Now, you know, whatever you want to say, right? She is not a tax-paying private citizen who works in the private economy, right? You know, early life. Bass was born in Los Angeles, California, the daughter of Wilhelmina née Duckett and DeWitt Talmadge Bass. Her father was a postal letter carrier and her mother was a homemaker. So she, you know, her dad was a postal worker, right? How stereotypical can you get? And her entire life has been a exercise in taking money from productive citizens and giving it to non-productive citizens. And as long as you make that a possible thing, productive people are going to leave in California in droves. And they have been, but the tune of millions a year. And because she has no experience, right? She was married for 6 years, 40 years ago. She has one child of her own, 4 stepchildren. She's never, you know, so since 2004, she was in the California State Assembly, you know, majority leader of the California State Assembly from 2006 to 2008, Speaker of the California State Assembly, years House of Representatives from 2011 to 2022, and then, you know, mayor of Los Angeles from 2022 to the present. So she's never worked in the private economy. You know, she's been an anti drug community activist, and she's been a physician's assistant working in local government hospitals. And she right. So what does she know about actually productive people working in the private economy? Nothing. And to her, these productive tax-paying people. I can't remember the gentleman. I'm not on Twitter, so forgive me for fumbling here. But the non-taxpayer sees a herd of cattle and thinks that they're wild, and you just take what you need. And right, it's free. It's there. Right. What they don't realize is that's actually a herd of cattle or a herd of sheep that shepherds and herdsmen have like gathered together, and they very carefully manage the grass and they move it from place to place, and they monitor the health of the herd, and they very selectively breed it, and they only slaughter when necessary, and they slaughter at specific times for specific purposes. Right. This is not it's just free. And when you build places that are devoid of people who actually have skin in the game. There's no feedback loop of like, this is a bad idea. Because it's going to harm, that when the Greta Thunberg, right? Like, we need a 100% tax on gasoline. We need to make gasoline engine cars illegal. Do you know any of the physics behind the energy physics behind like moving stuff? And obviously these people don't, because even a cursory look into the math will tell you, like, the grid in America is not capable of electrifying 1/10 of the cars on the road. It would fall apart. Let alone, 50% or 100%. We couldn't handle it. The amount of lithium you would need would, right? I don't even know if it exists. And so you can't have people who don't know what they're talking about run things and then have it expect to work out well. And where this is a problem, of course, is that on the Republican side, is they don't want to admit that LARPy guy who LARPs as a free homesteader like the 1860s or 1870s on the prairie in his suburban home, that's a disaster too. And actually, what you need is productive places filled with productive people. And they're symbiotic, right? A productive person in a non-productive place is just making the eventual crash worse, because they're propping up a system that will fall apart even harder once it falls apart. There's not that feedback loop that allows for correction.
Well, I liked what you said about having skin in the game, right? Because this is a real problem with our system, right? That neither the leaders nor the majority of the electorate has any skin in the game, right? Hoppe got into this in, Democracy, the God That Failed, right? Where he was talking about, his argument for monarchy. And his point is basically that, look, like when you have a monarch, right, a title handed down from father to son, you have skin in the game. Exactly, right? You want your kingdom to prosper because, well, that's what you're leaving to your kids. Now, similarly, right, the way that our republic was set up, and look, I'm a little bit, shall we say, bearish on democracy generally, but the system was very different than it was now, right? The way that our system originally worked, the way that Rhodesia worked, was you had to own property, right? You had to have a stake in society because, let's be honest, right, the way that someone who owns a piece of it acts is very, very different from someone who is effectively just a net drain on society, right? Someone whose only interest is in extracting resources from other productive members of society. And this is a point that Land makes, right, when he's talking about thrifty politicians, right, in our current system, where he says that's an evolutionary dead end. Those politicians, compared to their compatriots who are just, profligate spenders, are going to lose because the incentives are set up in such a way that, if you were a politician, you can get the most in the least amount of time by completely wasting money. And of course, Land was talking about the national level, but this certainly applies to local governments as well, right? If you're a mayor, okay, who is the longest serving mayor currently around? I probably don't know about them. Maybe 10 years, maybe 20, but it's certainly not a lifetime appointment, right? What incentive do they have to run their city well if they're only going to be in the job for 4 years? It's very clearly a significant organizational problem.
Yeah, well, and look at all the different. It's difficult. Our mutual friend Stormy is great at looking at kind of the big picture stuff, And, sure, the city of Los Angeles might be in fiscal trouble, but it's not just the cities, right? It's all the counties and all the county school districts and all the hospitals and like everything is all in fiscal trouble. So anything public, right, is in a fiscally unsustainable position. For structural reasons, right? They use that mechanism that you mentioned, right? It's really easy to get all the firemen and teachers to show up to the local polls, right, at 100%, and they might be only 8% of the electorate, but 100% of 8% is way better than the 2% of the remaining 92% that shows up to vote because they don't feel the stakes. And so the prison guard union or this, Pete and I talked about it when we were talking race war in high school, but right, the teachers unions are effectively money laundering operations to Democratic Party politicians, have been for half a century. Republicans want to do, right, because they're just as liberal in the small L sense about the post-war consensus as the Democrats. They don't actually disagree about anything substantive in the post-war consensus. Like, look at what's happened to someone like Andrew Isker or Stephen Wolf or Orrin McIntyre. The second you actually start, or Tucker Carlson and Daryl Cooper, right? The second you actually ask a question about the post-war consensus, everyone loses their minds. Well, if Republicans are, the sensible speed limit drive off the cliff party, and the Democrats are the 90 miles an hour off the cliff but free stuff for everybody party, like, who's gonna win? The free stuff for everybody party, of course.
Well, exactly. I made a horrible mistake, and went to an event where DC people were, right. It was entirely my own fault, but nonetheless, right. And I got into, shall we say, a non-consensual conversation where I was really trying to, edge out of the room, with a guy who heard me talking to a friend, mention the fact that I didn't like democracy. And he not only flipped out, like really flipped out, but when I was saying things like, well, look at the incentives we've set up, like this is an open door, right? There's always, there are core flaws to this game, right? It's like tic-tac-toe, where once the flaw in the game is discovered, it's only going to ever result in a draw or a loss for you, right? So knowing that information is out there, right? It's not like we're starting from scratch. The decision to say, well, it would be wrong to play a different game, right? Morally, is just completely stupid to me, right? Look, I get you have an aesthetic appreciation for the system we have, but that equation has been solved. There are two very easy ways to buy elections, right? The simplest one, right, is what you mentioned, the free stuff one, which is basically just saying, like, vote for me and I'll, more money on your EBT card. The other one is to just increase the number of electors. And we're seeing both happen, right? And so to me, it's like, I say this as someone who likes America, but at least in its current form, this cannot go on, especially if you're a rightist of any stripe. But sorry, DE, back to you.
Okay, well, so I don't know if this is going up on YouTube or not. But
it is, but I can edit out whatever you're about to say.
Well, no.
For YouTube
okay. So with that in mind, right? The 2020 election stolen allegations. Okay. They might have merit, they might not. Let's just assume everything was on the up and up and Donald Trump actually lost. The problem with those is in 6 big cities, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Detroit. I think that's all the 6 major swing states, right? There were large populations of non-white people that to audit those votes in places like Maricopa County, where Phoenix is at, or in Philadelphia, right? Or in Wayne County near Detroit, right? If you audit those, you're a racist. You say, well, for instance, if there was 105% turnout in Wayne County of registered voters, like, wait, that's not possible. We can't count all these, right? There's something wrong. If that's hypothetically what happens, right? The second you actually ask yourself the question, why are we counting these votes from this county, right? It's a disaster zone, right? The level of education in this county's gotten worse over the last 20 years. You know, the average person's semi-literate. The county's completely broke. You know, we're not free and equal citizens of the same republic, these people and us, right? This place is a disaster. And if we audit it, we're racist. Well, if you're, I don't think that, you know, the manosphere stuff is generally healthy. I think it leads to kind of degenerate, you know, skirt chasing and not building families, but there is some valuable information in there. One of the most valuable things those guys ever said was, you know, buy the frame, buy the farm, right? And if you accede to your enemy's framing of the issue, you're going to lose every time because they set the bounds of the conversation. And if you don't set your own frame and say, well, no, I think that it doesn't matter what race the people who live in a particular place are, I think everyone should get audited the same. Like, I think every vote has to be of a person who's, you know, legally registered vote, not a felon, an American citizen, above the age of 18, not dead. You know, like, there's this standard we have for people who vote. And either you meet that standard or you don't. But if you don't meet it, you don't vote. And if you don't strictly enforce that standard, then I'm not saying that the 2020 election was illegitimate. I'm saying that then that's what leads people to question the legitimacy of your system if you can't audit it and ensure that it's running according to, you know, specs and fair. And when one party says something like photo ID, which you need to buy booze or get on an airplane or open a checking account, is not something that you need to cast a vote. It's like, well, casting a vote's choosing to take people's money away at the point of a gun. Voting is violence. Why would we just let anybody, you know, inflict violence on other people in our society without knowing who they are and what they're, you know? I'm not a libertarian, haven't been for a long time, but a lot of what they say in this regard is true. And, you know, what are people doing that we're just going to let whoever vote? Well, you know, Karen Bass obviously doesn't care if 5 million people are in California illegally and cast ballots, because she's on team free stuff for everybody. And the people who, you know, are illegally voting are voting for her. So, you know, the system is set up to give her the incentive, and she doesn't care, right? If in 10 years there's a fiscal black hole that would destroy the state of California just in her county alone, right? All the different entities that are broke and going to get more broke are fast becoming completely unsustainable into the future. And it doesn't matter to her because she'll be out of office and on a pension. And she'll be powerful and rich and insulated, so she thinks, insulated from the, the choices, the consequences of her choices.
Well, this is not merely a hypothetical problem, right, of going broke. One of the things that I talked to Peruvian Bull about a while back is that when governments get loans, right, that they have a credit rating. And as you get further and further down that scale, it becomes more and more expensive for you to get financing. So it creates this death spiral where we have a lot of debt, so we need to borrow more money. But because we've borrowed so much, it costs us more money to borrow. And so it creates this death spiral, right? And there are certain cities in the US that have already gone through this before. And thankfully for them, at least there was a possibility of the feds bailing them out. But in a situation where the feds themselves are subject to that death spiral, well, who's going to bail out, Jackson, Mississippi? Who's going to bail out New Orleans? Who's going to bail out? I mean, insert your favorite kind of poorly run.
Atlanta,
yeah,
Houston, Washington, D.C. I mean, New York City.
Right. It seems to be a problem that is not going to solve itself. So I'm curious, right? Could you look into your crystal ball? What do you predict is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years with these cities' finances?
Okay, so I'll briefly kind of outline the issue and then explain why things are going to be the way they are. So, keeping in mind that space triangle I talked about earlier, where you can have something that's affordable, cheap, close to work, right? If you have something that's cheap and close to work, you're not safe. You'll get stabbed. There are rich neighborhoods, Upper West Side or whatever, in New York or Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, right, where you're safe and close to wherever you want to be. But you can't complain too loudly. You can't organize because there's no such thing as FU money. There's only FU like poverty. So, and if you live in the safe place you can afford, it's impossible to organize just because it's impossible to organize because of the spatial setup. What that's done, the American suburban model, let's just use a hypothetical. Peachtree Acres outside of Atlanta is a hypothetical development of 1,000 homes and on approximately 300 acres. Okay. So 1,000 homes on quarter-acre lots gives you 250 acres for homes and 50 acres for things like parks, schools, fire stations, roadways, that kind of thing. Let's just hypothetically say that the property taxes per year in this Peachtree Acres place is $2,000 for every home, just across the board, uniform. That's $2 million a year. 2,000 homes, or 1,000 homes, $2,000, $2 million in taxes. What happens then, right? You might think, oh, $2 million, that's a huge ton of money. Well, the school has to have 30 staff in it, right? The elementary school for the 2,500 children that are going to be living in this neighborhood. So there's a couple schools, and the school, right, is going to eat $1 million in wages. Your fire station is going to eat a couple $100,000 in wages a year. And pretty soon that $2 million a year in property taxes that you're generating from this development is either gone completely most of the time, right? When you add fire and police, road maintenance people, teachers, all the public fiscal outlays that are going to be required for this Peachtree Acres. Right. Well, let's just say, hypothetically, you get the math to work out, enough people homeschool, enough people work from home, whatever, that of this $2 million, you're only spending $1,750,000 on salaries and everything else. Okay, you have $250,000 extra. Oh man, this development's generating $250,000 surplus a year. All right. Woo. Well, 10 years, that's $2.5 million. All right. That doesn't include the, $3 million in pension obligations. And in the 20 years, right, that it takes to have to completely replace all your pipes, all your internet, all your roads, all your everything that the city's now responsible for. The builder might have built the initial road, but the city is responsible for maintenance. So is that $250,000 that's going to have to cover pensions for the police, pensions for the teachers, pensions for the road guys, and cover the total replacement of all your roads in 20 years? Is that really enough? I mean, if the roads are $3 million to replace everything because the cost of materials goes up and the cost of labor goes up, and I been a long time since prices went down anywhere that I can see, right? So these places, and this is not just Peachtree Acres or wherever, hypothetical thing. This is everywhere, every major American suburb from Maine to Hawaii and from Florida to Alaska. They're all in this same situation because just fundamentally the math doesn't work. It's not dense enough, and it's not mixed enough, productive enough to be generating positive outflow. Like I've used this metaphor before. Let's say that if you measure economic productivity in terms of rain, right? Well, I'm sure there are blocks in Manhattan, like that one, even, old World Trade Center 1, right? Like it had more economic activity in it by itself than some entire countries. And it's equivalent of like sticking a bucket out in like a tropical downpour. You're going to fill that bucket really fast. And that very dense, very highly active economic activity area allows you to do things like have, gigantic 100-story tall buildings and elevators and fiber optic cable and electrical power and plumbing and everything in that one block, because there's so much stuff going on that it's a real minimal cost to put all that stuff there in that one spot and make that huge investment. Similarly, or if you have a gigantic farm and it rains even a quarter of an inch across, your 80-acre farm, that's thousands of gallons of water. And nobody cares if the back 40 has blazing fast Wi-Fi. All the resources, all the economic activity from the whole farm, accrue to the farmhouse. Like all the resources accrue to the farmhouse. And so you can make that wide, disparate economic activity pay when all you care about is making this one farmhouse productive, right? You build the farmhouse close to the road, or close to a railhead, and you pull all the wheat or the cows or the whatever off the farm, and you get them on the road or the railhead, and then boom, then you got money. Well, all those Peachtree Acres places, there's no one living above the store. It's just houses that people live there just to live there to live there. Where are the businesses? Where are the corner stores? Where's the apartment that, above the local, the corner pizza shop? Where's the mix of, there might be Bland Suburban Church or something, or, a strip mall along the edge or something like that. But there's not a real, like, people spend tens of thousands of dollars to go to Europe to experience like normal urban life, right? Where you walk along and there'll be a cafe, and then in a building, and then above it, it'll be, a bunch of apartments.
Well, and again, that's the thing that's so frustrating about all of this, right? Is that we're basically drowning in a bathtub, right? We don't have to live like this.
Right.
And
the average Republican will be like, well, I drive my F-250, and if you want to live in some place like Siena, Italy, you must be a homosexual communist. Do you hate Ford? It's like, no, I just don't think it's a good idea to spend, 4 hours a day in your car, bud. Like, it's not a healthy way to live.
Well, definitely. Right. Sorry, finish that thought.
I'll finish explaining why everything is broke, and then please, ask as many questions or as whatever as you want. So this hypothetical Peachtree Acres place, right? The town of Peachtree Acres development in the town of Peach Willows, Georgia, right? Well, they're losing money hand over fist, but right next door to Peachtree Acres is, and suburbs are named after that which they destroy, right? So there'll be Peach Bough Estates, and they'll develop that land. The city has this unincorporated, another 1,000 acres, same exact situation, and they'll sell that land to the developer for millions of dollars, right? And then all of a sudden their books look fantastic because they have millions of dollars. Now, over the long term, they're in the same, Peach Bough Estates is in the same situation as Peachtree Acres, right? You're asking it to build another school and accrue a bunch more debt and have a bunch more employees in the school, in the Peach Vine Estates, whatever East Peachtree school district, right? Oh, well, we got a new development, so we gotta add a bunch more secretaries and teachers and school nurses and what have you, right? So we're gonna have all this new employment, right? So the big line's gonna go up. But over the long term, is this place a productive place for people to live? And the answer is no. It's not. And the right can't admit that model is a failure, because then they would have to question the post-war consensus. And the Democrats can't admit that model is a failure, because to admit that was a failure would be to admit that their constituencies are the ones responsible for making it this way. Right? Robert Moses, the former state, he had a whole bunch of jobs, but Robert Moses wasn't an Episcopalian. Let's just put it that way. Now, Levitt and Sons are the ones who developed the suburb, the first Levitt town outside of New York, on what was formerly an onion field in Levitttown. And of course, the shopping mall was invented by one Victor Gruen, an Austrian immigrant. And, you get no points if you're listening to this show and haven't figured out that a certain ethnic group was behind all of this. If you're interested in really learning more, E. Michael Jones has a gigantic book, like 500 pages, called The Slaughter of Cities, that goes into this in excruciating, and I do mean excruciating detail. It's very painful to read sometimes, about what happened to America's big industrial cities. and it was from, and if you've listened to the show Pete and I did on Raceborn High School, that wasn't just one, this one particular case of Franklin K. Lane. It was uniquely bad there, sure, and it was in a rather unique situation because it was, in half in one borough and half in another, and all this other stuff. And there was, documented evidence, but this same thing happened in every major city in America. You can, go to your Google machine and look up high school riot in 1970, Seattle, and you'll find something. Portland, you'll find something. Los Angeles, you'll find something. Houston, Atlanta, Miami, you'll find this stuff literally every major city in America. So neither political party can be honest about this. And we're getting to the point now where we have so many cycles of Peachtree Acres yields to Peach Bough Estates yields to Magnolia Breeze Acres yields to, whatever you want to call it, all outside Atlanta, that we're on 3 and 4 cycles of this by now. What I called moving five minutes down the highway over 10 years ago, that there's this massive liability built up on the books, and what it would take to get to broke, right? Just get to even, the amount of private investment it would take. So, you have a home and your property tax comes, and let's just use this, $1,000, right? Let's just say, for ease of math, your home is worth $100,000. It's a 1% tax rate, so you owe $1,000. In order to get to even, you would have to not double your taxes or triple your taxes, but like order of magnitude. You'd have like $10,000 or more. It depends, how much more private investment will be necessary to even things out with our state and local governments. But no one's going to pay that. Particularly lately, when your schools aren't educating and your police aren't keeping you safe and the roads look like the dark side of the moon. What are you getting as, a heritage American who works in the private economy as a local taxpayer? What are you getting out of your local government? The school? Hospital? Roads in great condition? Police, firemen have a chance to just pull someone out of a tree? Or are they constantly responding to, a junkie who OD'd in your Walmart bathroom?
So, Dark Enlightenment, we are a bit over time. I'll have to have you back on another time. This was a really fascinating discussion, but if my people want to find you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Telegram mostly. And I'm on just podcasts here, there, and everywhere. Frequently, once a month, I'm on Pete Quinonez's show with Pete, my friend Charles Spadil, and Jose Nino to do what we affectionately call the Thought Crime Syndicate. I'm occasionally on the Third Rail program, and just occasionally as a guest elsewhere. So,
well, again, man, thank you so much for coming out. It was a good conversation. I'll be sure to have you on again. As far as my stuff, right, the Jay Burden Show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to check out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching is the best place to get all of your personal fitness needs taken care of. JD is truly an alarming human being. He looks like BJ Blazkowicz from the old Wolfenstein games. And so I'd advise you not to make him angry, and nothing makes him more angry than not paying him money. Again, DE, thanks so much for coming out. And everyone at home, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.
Thank you so much for having me.